Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the latest installment of Mystery at the Library. I'm Rebecca Vanook, the Executive Director of Library Reads. Thank you so much for joining us for the 12th installment, actually, of Mystery at the Library, brought to you by Sourcebooks and Baker and Taylor. We're streaming the event live on Facebook right now, as well as on Zoom. So welcome to all of you folks on Facebook. I am thrilled to be here tonight with New York Times bestselling author Clare Mackintosh, who will be discussing her claustrophobic thriller, Hostage. Before I begin our discussion, I have a few housekeeping items to make you all aware of. There's going to be multiple chances to win prizes this evening throughout the event. All you have to do is participate in the trivia poll that happens in the middle of the conversation, or ask a question for Clare, and you'll be entered to win a mystery book bundle prize pack from Sourcebooks. Now, don't worry, you'll know when it's going to happen. We usually do the trivia right in the middle of the program, so don't have to worry about waiting for that. And if you're participating via Facebook, we have a moderator there who's going to feed us your questions. So go ahead and put your questions just right there into the comment box. They'll make sure that I see them. If you're on Zoom with us tonight and you have questions, we're going to ask that you please submit your questions through the Google form and not through the chat box. You can see in the chat that Sourcebooks has just put up that link to the form. This is going to help us sort of sort them out a little better and make sure that I see the relevant questions. Go ahead and use that chat box to say hello to people, let us know where you're watching from, any kind of chat that you'd like to have with each other. But if you have specific questions for the second half of the program, please go ahead and use that Google form. That would help us out a lot. So we're going to begin with a little background on Clare. And I need to tell you right off the bat, she is 6 hours ahead of me right now. So it's midnight for Clare. So we are going to do our best to have a lively conversation and keep her awake with us tonight. I also wanted to let you know before I introduce her, we would like to keep this evening as spoiler-free as possible. We recognize that people watching this afterwards and maybe people who are here tonight have not necessarily had the chance to read or finish the book. So in your chat and in your Q&A, ask what you'd like to ask, but please leave out anything spoilery, and we're not going to discuss what happens at the very end. We're going to do our best to talk around some of these things. So just please keep that in mind. We'd like to keep it as spoiler-free as we can. Thanks for your cooperation with that. So on to my friend Clare. Clare Mackintosh is an award-winning New York Times and international best-selling author. She spent 12 years on the police force in England and has written for The Guardian, Good Housekeeping, and many other publications. Translated into 40 languages, her books have sold more than 2 million copies worldwide. Clare lives in North Wales with her husband and their 3 children. Hi, Clare. I'm so glad that you could talk with me this evening.
Hi, it's really great to be here. Although I have to say, I'm slightly disappointed that housekeeping announcement didn't include that the emergency exits are located here, and here, and maybe behind you. Come on.
You'll see the lights on the floor and a oxygen mask will drop down if we get
That's more like it. Yes.
Is that better? Do I need to say bye-bye, bye-bye, bye-bye at the end to everyone? Have a good rest of your day. Hope you enjoyed the trip. So let's jump right into some questions for you if we're all set with that. So first thing, I'm curious as to where the inspiration for Hostage came from. Can you tell us a little bit about how this plot got into your brain and what guided you into writing this?
I can, yes, I can. So this book is a kind of amalgamation of lots of different ideas. For several years, probably 5 years or so, I've had a note written in my notebook that said something along the lines of flight attendant, threat from home, save the plane, or save the family. So that literally just those few lines. So I've had that milling around, and I knew that I wanted to write it but I wasn't quite sure what that book looked like, what shape it was, what kind of book it was. And then I was on a flight from the UK to San Francisco, which is about 13 hours. And I was traveling with my family, which means that really the flight feels like it's about 26 hours. And I was thinking about how we live in this hyper connected world where, you know, I'm always on my phone. I am always having conversations. I'm always mid email conversation, mid text conversation. Whereas when I'm on a plane, I don't know what's happening on the ground. And when you look out of a plane window and you see all these houses, they all look really safe and warm. And yet, of course, there are stories and dramas going on in every single house. And when we're down on the ground and we look up at the sky and we see a plane and we think, oh, they're all happy, you know, they're all going on holiday. And again, we don't know what's going on up there. So I really wanted to write about that disconnect between the sky and the home. And then finally, I wanted to write about someone in a service industry, in a role where they're dealing with the public. And flight attendants are really interesting because the role that they look as though they're doing is not their actual role. You know, they are there to help us, to keep everyone safe. It happens to be that they also serve us cocktails and drinks and hand out bags of pretzels and blankets, but that's not their job. You know, that's not their function. And I really liked that. And I liked the fact that they have to deal with people from all walks of life. It felt very familiar. You know, I used to be a police officer, and so that felt familiar territory. So all those things came together to make Hostage.
Right. So in your bio, as I mentioned, and you just said, you've spent 12 years on the police force in England. So how does your experience help you write thrillers? And that's going to be part one. I'm going to ask you, how does this, relate specifically to Hostage as well? But let's just talk about because, you've got several other best-selling thrillers before this. Do you put some of your own experiences into those thrillers? Did being a police officer sort of make you want to get into that genre? Tell us a little bit about that background-wise.
So being a police officer is being a storyteller, which seems like an odd thing to say. And people think that I made this massive career change from being a crime fighter to being a crime writer. But it really doesn't feel that dissimilar. So when you're a police officer, you're looking for the story. You're talking to a victim of crime, and they're not necessarily articulate. You know, some are, some aren't. They very rarely start at the beginning of a story. They normally start at the end. They start with the crime. You know, what's happened, and your job is to reel them back and find out what led to that. What are the circumstances? How did they know that person involved? What's the history there? And then also to go even further and talk to them about what's the impact of this crime? How has it changed your life? So you're doing that with the victim. You're pulling the story out from the witnesses. You're working out who's the unreliable narrator, who can we trust? What's the story that the CCTV's got to tell, the forensics? And then you're packaging all of that up into a compelling story for a court. And that is exactly how I write a novel, and exactly how a thriller is told. So that was a really great training ground. And also what was so useful was the access that I had to people from all walks of life, not just my fairly safe, very white, very middle class bubble that I grew up in. And what it taught me was how thin the divide is between a law-abiding, safe, happy life and a life where you are making bad choices or you're pushed into bad choices. And I met so many people who crossed that line. And that's the area that I'm really interested in. And it's the area that my type of thrillers, so domestic suspense, psychological thrillers, domestic noir, that's the area that it occupies. Ordinary people placed in extraordinary situations. And what I love about that genre is that it puts the reader in those shoes and makes the reader think, well, what would I do? This is a very ordinary person. I'm a fairly ordinary person. I could be that woman, that person. What would I do in that situation? And so moving on to part 2 of your question, that's very much what I wanted to do with Hostage. So I chose specifically to tell this story from the point of view of a member of cabin crew.
Mm-hmm.
Not the pilot, not I don't know, not the big boss of the airline, having to make these big decisions, the guys with the power. I wanted someone on the kind of the bottom rung of the pyramid, someone who's doing an everyday job, who has to make an impossible decision. And my job, my experience in the police is weirdly similar to this sort of job, because you're never really off duty. You can go as a cop, you can stop and you can have your coffee and a bite to eat, but you're going to put that down the second you need to go to a job. And when you're on a plane, something I love doing is kind of glimpsing behind the curtain. You know how they turn the lights off and they close the curtains, and the staff, the cabin crew, are all hanging out in the galley.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get up and you go to the bathroom and you pull back that curtain, and it is like stepping onto the stage, behind the curtain, and they're talking about their boyfriends or their girlfriends, and they're reading magazines and they're having coffee and they're kind of off duty. But when you come through, the second they see you, it's, can I get you anything? Are you okay? Do you need a blanket? Do you need more pretzels? And I really like that sort of on-off duty element to them. So a lot of that went into Hostage.
Got it. So I'm really intrigued by what you said earlier about, as a police officer, when you're getting stories from people, the whole thing about unreliable narrators. Mm-hmm. Because myself, like many readers, we love unreliable narrators, right? That is something that I seek out in the specific thrillers that I choose. It's a trope that I love. And until you just said that, it never really occurred to me that I don't really find that happening in real life, right? Most of the people that I talk to, I trust what they're saying, or they're my friends, so I know that they're reliable. And it never really struck me that, right, being a detective or on the police force is really, they see unreliable narrators every day. So that really was kind of, when you said that, I'm like, I'm going to start looking for that in real life, people that are unreliable. And that's really great.
And you know what, you think that your friends are all telling the truth, but they might not be. But also this is this is a really interesting point, because when we're talking about unreliable narrators, either in fiction or in real life, we're not just talking about liars. Someone doesn't have to be deliberately telling you an untruth,
right,
to tell you an untruth. So let's imagine that we're not doing this on Zoom, that we are all in a big room together, not just you and me, but all these people. We've got Tara from Virginia, and we've got Carly from NYC, and Juanita from Minnesota. Everyone, we're all here in a room, and we're all having a coffee or a glass of wine or whatever we're having, and somebody gets murdered. Okay, I'm not. Well, I will pick on someone. Don't
murder one of our participants.
Can I not murder, like virtually murder Carol Kessler in like a tiny bit, in a role playing way? So someone gets murdered, not Carol. Carol's lovely. We will all give accounts to the police.
Right.
Every single one of those accounts will be different.
Right.
But none of us are lying, okay? Let's say we're all really, really law-abiding, truthful people. But we've all seen something different. We've all had a different perception. We've all chatted to the victim and to everyone else at the bar or at the buffet at lunch. We had a great lunch, right? We all chatted and we've all formed perceptions. So we give those accounts to police, and some of them are reliable and some of them aren't, because, I've got a terrible memory. I can't actually remember what so-and-so was wearing. So that, I think, is really key in fiction, that in Hostage, we've got we've got different accounts. So for example, we've got Mina. So Mina is our flight attendant. She's on this. We haven't said anything about what the book is about, but Hostage is set on a 20-hour flight, that nonstop flight from London to Sydney. Mina is our flight attendant, and she describes some of the passengers, or she refers to them. So we've got her inner monologue. She's talking about some of the passengers, but that's just her perception of them. But what we also then have is an account from the passenger's perspective. So we have these little vignettes, maybe 12 of them, that tell us how the passengers feel they present themselves. It tells their own story. And we can put those two things together. The reader has to do a bit of detective work in Hostage to work out which passenger we're talking about, and marry it up with what Mina's said. And then we have to decide who do we trust? Do we trust Mina's perception? Do we trust the passenger themselves? Do we come to a third conclusion? I wanted, just before we go on to your next question, I know I'm talking a lot.
No, this is wonderful.
I wanted just to answer Michelle Mears's just comment about spoilers. And I completely see where you're coming from, that, it's difficult to talk to talk openly about a book and really discuss it if we want to avoid spoilers. And I think we can come quite close. And if you've read a book, so for example, we could talk about the ending in slightly coded terms, and you and I, having read it, would understand what we're talking about. But someone who hasn't read it yet wouldn't necessarily know the significance of, let's say, cookies. And so we won't spoil it for them by giving actual details about who does what. Okay, so that hopefully makes sense.
Well, and to remind everyone too, right, these recordings are available afterwards, and so it's not just the people who are participating tonight who we hope have had a chance to read the book. It can be, your fans from anywhere who are maybe in the middle of the book and see that there's an interview with you and they want to watch it. And yes,
exactly.
And I know perils of the internet.
I have accidentally stumbled upon spoilers. So there was a brilliant book called We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves by Karen Joy Fowler.
Okay.
Someone will correct me if I'm wrong. And there's an incredible twist in it. But I accidentally stumbled upon that twist on social media before I'd had a chance to read the book. And it was so fundamental to the understanding of the book. And I was so upset by it that I try quite hard to not spoil anyone else's enjoyment of books.
Understandable. So we're talking about these multiple points of view. So we have Mina and we have Adam, and I want to ask you a little bit later also about kind of the two very stressful storylines that you have going on at the same time and what that must have been like to write that. But let's talk a little bit about the action with these individual passengers we were just talking about. So why did you decide to include the viewpoint of some of these other narrators, introducing them sort of slowly throughout, and then it dawns on the reader who these folks are and what's happening? You could have saved yourself the energy and just made it Mina's story, but instead you gave us these other folks. Tell us about including the other narrators.
So that was partly because I wanted the reader to be able to piece together the mystery a bit more. So I could have had Mina describe people and give their seat numbers, and then we wouldn't have needed that. And the reader would have known that the person sitting in, 3A was a particular type of person. But that only gives us one perspective. And I did want the reader to look at people in a different way. And it also mirrors the experience that you have when you're traveling. So I travel a lot, or pre-pandemic, I traveled a lot, and normally with work. So I might fly once a year, if that, with my family, but I would fly a dozen times or more without my family. And when you travel on your own, you're not distracted by anything apart from other passengers. And so if you're like me and you're an inveterate people watcher, you look around you and you think, I wonder where you're going and how you feel and what you're reading, and are you working, or what are you watching, and who's that message to? Is it to your family? And I find all that really interesting. And so those vignettes really mirror that these are the people around you. I want you as the reader to feel as though you're on that plane, surrounded by these people that I'm allowing to talk to you, the reader, directly. And I want you to form an opinion of them, because I want the reader to humanize the people on that plane, to understand, to realize that these are real people with lives. And also harking back to what I said earlier about that line that we cross between a good life and a bad life, that actually that happens really easily. And that's something that I've seen happen in real life, and I explore a lot in my fiction. So in Hostage, we really see that in those passengers. We absolutely understand what's brought them to the point where they are.
Did you find it difficult creating and writing all those characters? One of the things I thought as I was reading, it's probably a good halfway through, when the action really starts going on the plane, there's a big scene where everyone is up out of their seats and everyone is yelling and everyone is here and everyone is there, and there's a lot of chaos going on. And as I was reading it, I was almost half tempted to start, shouting some of this dialogue out loud, because I could very finely picture it. As you do, I like to people watch as well. And one of the things that hopefully generally happens on flights is everyone is very quiet, and maybe you only hear the people that are right around you. And so to have this big melee happening in a tight, closed space, you wrote that just fabulously. I really felt, this heart pounding. No one knows what's going on. Everyone is scared. Everyone is shouting. People are yelling at each other. Some people. And how did you feel writing that? Did you have to keep notes for yourself? Like, this person's going to act like this, and I'm going to have somebody make sure they yell out that. Or tell us a little bit about how that was, having all of these characters that we really only see for the duration of the plane. You really gave them this very full scene to be on. It was almost like watching it on screen. So how was it to write it?
Yeah, it was challenging to write, actually. And it was the environment that made it challenging. So firstly, I wouldn't normally have that number of people in a book. If I was writing a domestic suspense thriller, I might have, a family, maybe two families. That the cast is quite small. And when you set a book on a plane, especially a big plane like that that's going London to Sydney, this isn't a private jet with 6 people on it. This has got like 353 or whatever passengers on it. So the first thing that I did was I confined the action to business class now, and that wasn't because I wanted a tax-deductible research trip. I promise that wasn't the reason. It made my plane smaller. Is the bottom line. And then when I did that, actually that introduced another dynamic, because suddenly we had a kind of them and us situation between economy and business class, which was not really sort of part of my plan or the story, but happened organically. So then that made my plane smaller, which helped. I then have my key players, and part of the way that I present those stories, so the fact that I've got them talking directly to the reader is a bit of a narrative ploy, because it fixes their identity and their voice in the reader's head. So if I had described them in the third person, that gets really confusing, because it's the same voice. It's my authorial voice describing 12 different people, and that's really hard to hold in a reader's head. Whereas if they're presented as monologues, we remember that much, much more easily. They're sort of clearly identifiable. So even though we don't necessarily know what they look like, we know what they sound like, and we can fix them. So that helped. What was really difficult, actually, was the logistics of moving around a small area, a fight scene in a plane. It's really hard, and you want to keep the action going, but you've also kind of got to clamber over seats, and if you want to get from one side to the other, what are you going to do? Are you going to sort of climb over 4 people, or are you going to walk around it? So those sorts of things were tricky, and for the best part of a year I had on my whiteboard a big seating plan of a plane. So I had business class, and I made up this plane, and I made up the plane for a very good reason. It wasn't because I don't know what a plane looks like. There are lots of seating plans online, but I wanted complete control over my plane. And more importantly, I didn't want anyone to write in and tell me that I got it wrong. So by making up a plane, I can have whatever seating arrangement I want. I made the point very early on in Hostage that this was a bespoke plane that had been done just for this route, so I could put seats where I wanted to and cupboards where I wanted to, and nobody can tell me that I've got it wrong, which is great. That is completely brilliant. I bow down to that. That's very, very smart. Because you are right, people would be, a 747 doesn't have the lavatory in the front, it would have that. Right, exactly. And you know, plane geeks are the best.
Yes, they know
also,
stuff.
And just to give you an example of how brilliant some of my readers are, there is a Scrabble game. You play Scrabble in America,
yes.
don't you? Okay, there's a Scrabble game in Let Me Lie, and it's not like a plot point. They're just playing Scrabble. It's a very non-exciting event. But I got the score wrong on one of the moves, and a reader wrote in to say, and I had just added up the letters, but she wrote in and said, it's not just the letters, the length of that word means that you would have hit either a double or a triple score. So you know, my readers are good. That's, you know, it is funny how some of us really read with an eagle eye like that, and the details matter. So, all right. So let me ask you the question that's at the heart of this book. And this is not a spoiler for anyone, because if you're interested in this book, you know what's going to happen here. The flight attendant has to make a decision between helping the plane be taken over or having her child have harm come to her. So if you had to choose, would you sacrifice one person you love to save the lives of hundreds of strangers? I know the question, you're like, please don't ask me that. That's like, what can you give us a little bit of authory insight? What did you feel like when you were writing this? Well, so I find this really, really hard, because when I was writing it, I would absolutely save my family. And in fact, I had a discussion with my editor, my UK editor, about this, about how we would sort of, you know, position the book. And she said, you know, I'm not sure we can present it as this is a difficult choice, you know, an impossible choice for her, because everyone would just save the child, you know, in a way that's not really a dilemma. And then since it's been published, so I'm having lots of book club discussions, and I've got a Facebook group at the moment where we're talking about Hostage, lots of spoilers. So if anyone wants to come in there, you can get all the spoilers you want. There you go. And actually a lot of people, so the question I posed was, should Mina face charges for you know, assisting, because again, I don't think that's a massive spoiler. I was sort of biting my nails. I was wondering that myself. But overwhelmingly, my book group is saying yes, she should face charges, and that they would not have sacrificed a plane. So, you know, I think it is a bit of a tricky question to answer. What would you have done, Rebecca? Oh no, I didn't even think you'd turn that back on me. So I have 2 young sons who mean the absolute world to me, and I think I would do whatever I could to save my kids. Yeah, I think I would. Yeah, I do, without hesitation. Well, sorry, everybody else. I don't. You're all like, let's not ever get on a flight with Rebecca ever. Definitely. My God, have you seen all these amazing questions?
It's great. It is great. I think I told you during our practice, we have the best attendees ever. I love our audience so much. They always come up with these wonderful questions, and it's such a delight. I get so excited by this. So why don't we go ahead and move into our trivia question right now, or trivia questions. We've got 3 of them. And then that way I can have some time to read through the questions that are coming through, and we'll wrap up with those. So let's get into our trivia. So that was an impossible question. We won't make anybody else answer that one. So we'll get into the trivia. So this one, the trivia we're going to do tonight, we'll do whose line is it anyway? So we'll do quotes from Hostage that are going to appear on the screen, and we want our audience to guess who said the line. So for Facebook Live participants, the trivia questions are going to be entered into the comment section for you to answer. And don't forget, if you participate in these trivia polls, or anyone who's asking questions, you'll be entered into our mystery prize pack giveaway. So that first one just flashed up on the screen there. We'll have 3 questions that'll come up, and while you are answering those questions, Claire and I will discuss the kinds of books that Claire likes to read. So we always want to know this, especially with our thriller writers. Do you like to read thrillers as well, or does that sort of like throw you into a tizzy? Or tell us what you like to read yourself, and maybe give us some of your current book recommendations. We always love that.
I read anything. Well, do I read anything? No, I read almost anything. I don't read very much historical fiction,
okay,
and I don't read very much fantasy or science fiction. But a couple of years ago, I was a judge for the Costa Book Awards in the UK. And the category that I was judging was the first novel awards, which is across all genres. And so I had 70 books to read, all sorts of different genres, and it really pushed me out of my comfort zone. And you know what? I found some amazing historical fiction that I loved, some amazing fantasy and science fiction. So it was a good reminder of, to step outside my comfort zone a little bit. But generally, I read a lot of thrillers, and particularly psychological thrillers or domestic suspense, which I really love. But what I find is that I need a little break between thrillers, and so I will often gravitate towards a romantic comedy or literary fiction or some poetry or something that is a bit of a palate cleanser between crime novels. So I've got 3 books actually, right, and I've got copies of them here. So these are books that I've read lately and loved. So the first one is an advanced reader copy. So the cover isn't the finished cover. But this is Before You Knew My Name by Jacqueline Bubletz. And it is about 2 women in New York City, and one is murdered and the other woman finds the body.
Ooh.
And the woman who finds the body sets about trying to find out who this murdered woman is, because she is just, well, the back says the city's latest Jane Doe, an unidentified murder victim. And it's really about women's right to walk safely through our streets, and it's about the way that a victim's identity is eroded in the news, how the news articles focus on the act and the perpetrator rather than the life that was taken. So it's a really, really good book, and I really recommend it. It made me very angry, but it's incredibly written. So Before You Knew My Name, Jacqueline Bubletz.
Right.
The other thriller, so that's a thriller. This is a thriller as well. This is 3 Hours by Rosamund Lupton. This is extraordinary, this book. So I would call this a thriller with heart. It is set in a school during a siege that lasts 3 hours. So there's the sort of the ticking clock. It's a very unusual school. It's quite an expensive fee-paying school in in the woods where you've got different buildings, some distance to each other. So it's quite a claustrophobic environment. It's in the snow. But what's extraordinary about this thriller is that it has such emotional pull. And I listened to it on audio and I had to pull the car over for the last 15, 20
Ooh,
minutes.
that's a real thumbs up right there.
Incredible. Okay, here's my palette cleanser. Completely different. Would I Lie to You? By Alia Ali Afzal. So this is a book about, so I would call this women's fiction or maybe book club fiction. And this is a book about a woman who borrows £70,000 from the family savings for something really important. Well, no, not something really important at all. She spends it. Okay, she spends it, but she means to put it back. But then something happens. Her husband loses his job and he says, it's fine, it's okay, because we've got £70,000 in the savings, and she has to put it back before he finds out. So it's all about trust and relationships and, you know, the ethics. Really, really good fun and quite a thought-provoking read. There we go.
Ooh, all right, those sound great. So everybody, those titles and authors are in the chat if you missed those. And let's see here, our poll results should be just about finished now. We'll have our tech folks from Sourcebooks put up. You can see if you got the right answers or not. Let's see here. There we go. So the first one, truth slid into my mind like the answer to a crossword clue long after the paper's been thrown away, and my mouth formed the words I didn't want to say. That was a line spoken by Mina, and yay, the majority of people got that one right. Fantastic. Second one. There we go. It's all about the hierarchy for you lot, isn't it? The establishment, the powers that be. When will you see it's the establishment that's beep everything up? That was spoken by Becca, actually. So good. 25% of you got that one right. And then our third one, the way I've behaved over the last few months has done nothing to help her trust me. I need her to understand that right now she's safest with me. That is a quote from Adams. Very good, everyone. Nice job on those. All right, so at this point, this is our fun part of the program, the questions from the audience. You can still go ahead and submit those. They're coming in. They always come in fast and furious right at the end, but we've got some time here to go through these. So as I'm looking through these, the ones that stick out to me that I would love to get answered right away revolve around Sophie. So Sophie is the adopted daughter of Mina and Adam. She plays a very big part in the story. And so we've got some questions from folks about Sophie. So we have a question first for Jill, or from Jill. So she says, Sophie was really instrumental, especially in the final outcome. Did you consider including more of her thoughts or, you know, an inner monologue from her during the story? She was my favorite character. So tell us a little bit about writing Sophie and how that was for you.
Okay, great question. And I know that Gay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sophia, not Sophie, pardon me.
So Sophia is absolutely my favorite character as well. And you're quite right, very instrumental in the whole story. Although, of course, to begin with, not only do we not think she's instrumental, but actually she doesn't know she's instrumental. Did I consider writing more? No, I don't think so, because she is just a child. You know, she has very little proactive power to change things, and that's kind of is how life is. That children are very disempowered, and so I think giving her only a small bit of the narrative reflected the fact that children aren't given very much voice. You know, it's sort of reflective of society. But I did kind of feel when I'd finished the book that I wanted to go off and write a whole Sophia spin-off, like what's Sophia doing now? She's either going to be like running Google or she's going to be in prison.
But or maybe both. Why not both?
Yeah, absolutely. They're not mutually exclusive. Right. But let me tell you a little bit, though, if we've got time, about just how she came to life.
Yes. So we actually have a question. Real quick, let me just ask that one so you can sort of use it in your answer. We have, it just disappeared. We had a question from Gay. Yes, who says, Sophia is a major character. Did you build her along the way, or did you build the storyline around her? So tell us a bit about that.
So she arrived as a result of a conversation that I had with a friend whose daughter was adopted. So Sophia was adopted as a baby, and my friend's daughter was adopted when she was just a few months old. And I, in my ignorance, had assumed that a baby adopted that young would have no real fallout from their upbringing, but I couldn't have been more wrong. And my friend was explaining that it had been a really special day, that at the age of 8, so their daughter had been with them for more than 7 years. At the age of 8, their daughter had come to mum and for the very first time asked for affection, offered a hug. And that was such, obviously very moving for them. But I was horrified that that's what they're dealing with, that all those years of battling attachment disorder and that fear of becoming too attached to someone who might abandon them. So that is the start of Sophia. And as you suggest, Gay, I kind of that her character sort of evolved. So initially she was just a child who'd been adopted, and that was just her. But then she became very much part of the reason why people did what they did. And yeah, I really fell in love with her. But the absolute ending that involves Sophia isn't something that I planned. I normally plan all my twists. But that came right at the end, the very last draft, when I suddenly realized that here was a child who has a lot more agency than most children, and I wanted to give her the final say.
Very nice. Okay. So speaking of endings, we have a question from Lynn, who would like to know how you come up with such unexpected endings. So, for this, you said it just sort of, you decided it. Do you plan ahead of time for your other books? Do you sometimes authors start with an ending and they build the story around it. Sometimes the ending changes halfway through. Sometimes it changes more than once. Tell us about your twist endings. Tell us.
Yeah, they do change a lot. So I always have an idea of how they're going to end. And with Hostage, I knew the ending, and it's almost like there are two endings of Hostage, really. So you have the final reveal, and I always knew what that final reveal was going to be, where we understand who the baddie is and what they've been doing. But then what often happens is, in the course of the first or the second draft, and with Hostage it was the second draft, that there's another twist, or there's another little bit to the ending that adds something to the story and sort of finishes it off nicely. And that's what happened with Hostage.
Okay. We have a question from Peggy, who is interested to know how you feel about the climate change crisis. And I know in the book, you've got some of that. There's a conversation with you at the end of the book and in your author's note, but let's discuss that, because that is not something that's apparent at the start, that's what's going on here. All of a sudden, the reader comes to this realization that this whole situation is an activist situation. So talk to us about why you decided that climate change should be sort of that flashpoint of the activist situation.
So this was not about me deciding that I wanted to make a big political point about climate change, but I did want to make a point. And the point I wanted to make was that not all terrorists look the same. They're not all Muslim, they're not all brown skinned, they're not all religious fanatics. And it makes me feel quite angry when I see that trope of Muslim religious fundamentalists portrayed in every terrorist film, every terrorist book. And so I knew when I started writing this book, about terrorists, not a massive spoiler, it's a book called Hostage, set on a plane, that there were going to be terrorists. And so I wanted to think about what kind of terrorists are there. And when I was a police officer, one of the groups of people that I dealt with at a particular time in my career were animal rights extremists. So people who were so angry, so impassioned about fighting for animal rights that they were prepared to break the law. They were prepared to hurt people. So one of the cases that I was involved in was a group of animal rights protesters who set fire to a scientist's family home. And everyone got out okay, but they could have died. And I was really interested in that discrepancy within someone, that someone can feel so passionately about protecting a cause, a thing, an animal, a tree, whatever it is, that they're prepared to sacrifice someone else. And of course, it very much mirrors the situation that they then put Mina in. And so I chose climate change to not choose religious extremism, but also because it is genuinely a very topical and important issue. As I was writing the book, there were climate change protests happening. There were planes that were grounded in the UK by activists. And I think it's something that's going to become more and more prevalent. I found it really interesting and rather emotional during the main bit of the pandemic to see how the environment began to improve and change as a result of everyone staying at home and no one flying or taking public transport. So it is something that I'm interested in and enjoyed writing about.
Okay. I think it also very much firmly sets the book in this time period. It's, this is definitely one of the major world issues right now. And it's very much a book of its time. All right. So let's see here. We have a question from Carol, who would like to know if you choose character names before, during, or after your writing process.
Well, I'm now going to name my next major character Carol. I do both. So I choose names right at the beginning, and they are just holding names. So sometimes they stick, but often they're just holding names, so that I can write a plan or a synopsis. So I'm not thinking about the woman there and the woman there and the friend of the woman. So they all have names, and then I go away and I do some work on character, and I think, who are they? What age are they? That's really important. What age are they? Where are they from? And then I'll look at websites with names on. So, the most popular names of men born in 1946 in Italy. And then I'll use that as a basis, and I'll sort of play around with them until they feel right. And there's a bit of a weird juggling act you have to do with names, because although in real life it's perfectly normal to have 3 Annas, in your workplace, you can't have that in a novel because people don't. And you can't even have names that sound a bit similar or start with the same letter. You need to make things a bit easier on your reader. So there's lots of playing around with names. And then what happens is I write my first draft and it goes to my editor. And then I get my editorial note and I cry for a couple of days. And then I start work on the new draft. And normally it's quite substantial changes. And to help with those changes, I will very often change some names. So not necessarily central characters, but certainly secondary characters. Change the names, new document. It almost feels like a new book. And that's
starting fresh almost. That's really interesting. Oh, thank you. So continuing along this line of questioning, because we all kind of like to get a glimpse into the author's life, We have a question from Catherine who would like to talk about your writing process. Do you set aside time each day to write? Do you use note cards or a whiteboard? I think especially with thrillers, we always imagine there has to be an outline. You know, no one can just write this out of their head without, you've got to keep characters straight. You've got to keep the mystery straight. So tell us a little bit about your writing schedule and process.
Oh, Catherine, if you'd have asked me this 2 years ago, I would have told you that I had the most amazing writing routine. And then the pandemic hit, and honestly, everything has just, it's just all gone to dust. The kids were home for like more than a year, and I don't know. So I'm just getting back into the swing of it, and now it's the school holidays and the kids are home again. Mm-hmm. So roll on September. Theoretically, what I do is I am always working on 3 books.
Okay.
Right now, I'm promoting Hostage. So that's a story in my head when I'm doing events. So I'm talking about it and doing interviews. I am writing, I'm doing the edits of next year's book. So that's a kind of analytical part of my brain, trying to solve problems and make things more tense and pacier. And then I'm doing a first draft of 2023's book. So I've done my, I say first draft, I haven't quite started my first draft. I'm at the planning stage. So what I've got is a 5,000 word synopsis. I know where the big twists are. It's quite a twisty book. I know who the characters are. And I'm just expanding that into a chapter breakdown so that in September, on the first day of term, kids go back to school and I hit my desk, and then I will write, and then I won't do anything else but do that first draft from September to December. And that's my autumn term. Get that first draft done. Don't go back. Don't start reading over what I did yesterday. Just write. 10,000 words a week if I can, get it down. And then I take a break, and then I start editing. And it's kind of like that. And it just keeps going really all the time. So I do have notebooks, but I don't write longhand. I write everything straight into the computer. And I do have a whiteboard on my office wall, but that has very boring things like deadlines and occasionally the cross section of a Boeing 777.
Thank you for giving us a glimpse into that. It never occurred to me that you don't get to just concentrate at one book at a time, that you have to be talking about your current book, finishing the next one, and then already planning for the one after that. That never really, thank you for sharing that insight with us. So we're just about running out of time here. These are some great questions. Really appreciate everyone. I want to wrap up with, we have a similar question from Ruth and from Beth, because I'd like to see what you have to say about this. So we're thinking about the books for sale in airport gift shops. So how many passengers do you think are going to pick this one up when they see it in Waterstones in the airport? And then Beth's question is more, would you give this to someone who was about to get on the plane for their in-flight reading?
Beth, I would totally give this book to someone on a plane. I would give it to anyone. You should give it to everyone. So I heard an interesting fact from a former bookseller in the UK at an airport. They always saw great sales of any book that had an aeroplane on the cover.
Really?
And that was true, whether it was like a romantic, fluffy cloud contrail, or whether it was a slightly scarier thriller. Quite often, I guess it's a bit like when you go to Greece and you think, oh, I'll read a Victoria Hislop book, set in that country. So you're going on a plane, or you go on a train journey and you read Murder on the Orient Express. I think there's something that makes us drawn to books that resonate with where we're going. And I listen, all of you who have asked amazing questions that we haven't answered, I'm so ridiculously easy to find online. because I spend all my time procrastinating on social media when I should be writing books. So just come, come and ask me questions, come and chat. I'm not scary.
Oh, that's delightful. And tell us again, you said you had, is it a Facebook group that's discussing the book, or on your website, or how can our friends here find their way into that discussion?
So I have a normal Facebook page that's sort of out with a public Facebook page, where I don't generally have spoilers, but I do lots of normal book chat. But I also have a Facebook group called the Clare Mackintosh Book Club. Very egotistical of me. And we have a different book each month that we talk about. And this month, because Hostage has just come out, we're discussing Hostage. So that's the place to come if you want to thrash stuff out, or tell me that you hated bits, or ask other people what they thought about the ending, whatever you want. Clare Mackintosh Book Club on Facebook.
All right, everyone, that's great. Everyone can find that. So thank you so much, Clare, for spending your evening tonight, especially since it is so late. I truly, truly appreciate you spending midnight with me. And you're quite lively for midnight, so thank you for that. You had warned me, you thought you might yawn. I didn't catch a single yawn there, so thank you for staying awake for us. We appreciate that. And thank you to our wonderful audience. Sourcebooks has put our winners' names up there in the chat panel there, so check to see if you've won one of the mystery book bundles. If your name is listed, you just need to email Emily Ludloff with your address. Her email address is there in the chat. So again, Clare, it's really been a pleasure chatting with you. Big thank you to the audience for joining us, and make sure to join us for next month's Mystery at the Library event. That one's going to be Wednesday, August 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And this is actually going to be a panel discussion, a special cozy mystery panel. We'll have Dana Mentick, author of Pint of No Return, Catherine Bruns, author of Penne Dreadful, and Carrie Doyle, author of It Takes Two to Mango. And I want lots of questions about puns. So you've got a whole month to work on those. So get started, because I want a whole bunch of pun jokes during that discussion. So the registration link is there in the chat. So make sure you get that before this disappears. Register for that. And thank you again for joining us, everyone. Stay happy, healthy, and happy reading. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you so much.